So many of you may not know this, but I'm not an engineer by training. I never went to school for it. I don't hold a doctorate or certificate. I'm just a big fan of the subject matter, and I really enjoy talking about it on the show. But because I'm not an engineer, sometimes I need to seek help. One of our engineering correspondents, Danny Lewis, is one of those people that we like to talk to. Today, we have him on our show to talk about nuclear energy in Canada and where we stand today. Danny, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, good to see you, Sean. Yeah, most engineers too. I'll say I'm a mechanical engineer by schooling and stuff. But that doesn't mean I know absolutely everything about all things engineering. And
Sure.
Any engineer who does claim that, I'm just this kind of engineer, therefore I'm a complete moron on any other topic related to it, like that's not true either. So I'm a mechanical engineer, but I've done a lot of machine design. That was kind of like where I started, but then it was doing the kind of feasibility study and the analysis of, what would be the economics of bringing in this kind of a technology and doing the asset review of things. And so my foray into nuclear, like most people, started with like YouTube, just learning about the topics and that. But I'm based out of Saskatchewan, Canada. And the firm I was working with, we were doing a lot of kind of analysis work with the local power generation facilities in Saskatchewan. And at the onset of it was looking at, okay, we have a carbon tax coming in. And if you have a carbon tax and right now you're burning coal or you're burning natural gas, or if you care about the climate at all, what would be your solutions to this? And so we kind of looked through the gamut of it, all things considered, even saying, well, we've got a lot of extra hay, maybe we could pelletize that and put it into like a biofuel reactor. It kind of falls apart once you start to look at the logistics of actually transporting all the hay into a common location to be able to do that. Wind and solar, okay, for some point, but it doesn't scale enough to be able to meet the actual demands, what you want to do there. And then unless you want to flood all of northern Saskatchewan, hydro's out, and it's ungodly expensive to do it that way. And you start to look at nuclear, and nuclear has a big, broad spectrum of how well that technology is and what it does. And even when you're talking the molten salts versus like PWRs, doesn't matter. They're all efficiency, safety, and efficacy for what you're trying to do here. So that's how I got started in on it. And then since then, I've just been poking the right people, nagging the right people, learning what I can, and, reaching out to people like you and trying to get the message out to change the conversation.
Well, we certainly here at Rock Logic appreciate your contribution to the channel. A lot of people don't realize this, but when we did the electric vehicle episode, you were actually the key influence on that, because you actually brought up something that actually I still to this day take very personally, is that you mentioned one of the things I get sick about with electric vehicles is no one talks about the big issue with electric cars, and that's the electricity, that the electricity has to come from somewhere. And if it's not going to come from renewables, and if we're not building enough nuclear plants, especially in this country where we're retiring more nuclear plants than we're putting online, it's going to come from fossil fuels. There was a study from the University of Michigan Center for Sustainability where they predicted that by the year 2050, and this was by the most conservative estimates, by showing that, hey, we're gonna have all these subsidies and stuff for renewable power. We're still looking at 79% of the United States' electricity is going to come from fossil fuels, whether that be gas, coal, or some combination of the two. That doesn't mean that carbon capture won't play a role if it gets perfected, but the electricity's got to come from somewhere. And if it's not coming from nuclear, it's probably going to come from fossil fuels. So, you were a big help in helping us put that together.
Yeah, and I could probably even pee on your cornflakes a bit more with that.
Please.
So the conversation previously was to say, okay, if small Saskatchewan, province of like 1.2 million or so people, if everyone who had a car today just destroyed it and has an electric car that magically appeared. So let's not even talk about how you're making the car or mining the minerals to make the car, just having the car. you would quadruple the demand of electricity in the province. And that's taking the efficiency of the electric vehicles and inefficiencies of the gas vehicles and everything into account. But, there's more to it than that. You can't run everything off of electric vehicles. In our province, there's a lot of agricultural, and they'll use combines and big, huge industrial machines, or maybe even like excavators and stuff like that on a construction site. Those really can't be electrified unless you're swapping out giant honking batteries all the time. So for those, the viable solution to actually be going to like a hydrogen fuel cell technology, and to replace like the diesel that they're using now with the hydrogen fuel cell technology, you're going to have a big efficiency hit on there. So it's even more power. So that, I have 4 gigawatts now that I generate for the power. I need to go to 8 for electric vehicles. I probably need to go to about 12 to accommodate that diesel stuff. And then there's still, by the way, heating your homes in the winter. And to do that, now you're looking at like 24 gigawatts. So it's stupid amounts of electricity that people just don't actually understand. That's what the green economy looks like, and how are you going to power it? And like it's a bad enough argument to say, well, how do I just replace that 4 gigawatts? And I could just put enough solar panels on a battery somewhere. Okay, that's not the conversation. That is the first step. How do you get to 24? And it doesn't scale that much. And it's fields upon fields upon fields of wind turbines that fail after 25 years that you need to go replace. And by the way, there isn't some good way to recycle them. So there is starting to be a little bit of a realization, I feel, on the left that, maybe they were gaslit a little bit by those renewable industries. And maybe we shouldn't have dismissed nuclear so quickly.
Yeah.
The other thing, just to comment on the carbon capture, Saskatchewan actually pioneered doing a lot of carbon capture with coal, but it was a bad idea because for anyone who's familiar with the coal, like coal's not going away for metallurgical purposes. If you want steel, you're going to have coal. But when they talk about coal for power generation, it's like 30% grade. You're pretty much burning dirt because 70% of it is dirt. 30% of it is actual coal. So you're burning your dirt, which sounds like a great idea. And then you're going to try and do carbon capture off of that gas, and you're going to have so much impurities in it that's like the worst thing to try and carbon capture. Yeah. And where it will make probably a bit of sense is actually doing like methane carbon capture and doing like the combined cycle natural gas facilities with the carbon capture, because it's a lot cleaner of a CO2 stream coming off of the exhaust plumes.
Okay, well that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that. No, I mean that was really interesting, and I didn't know that about Saskatchewan. And we might have to bring you back on to do a follow-up episode on that, because
one thing, just even on nuclear, before we get into that too much, Saskatchewan is a very not a lot of people know about it, but using cobalt for radiation therapy was started in Saskatchewan. And uranium production predominantly in Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan has a long history of nuclear power and nuclear energy. There is a break-even fusion reactor in Saskatoon in the physics building in the basement. And we had a slowpoke reactor, kind of like a test reactor in the city, like in the heart of the city too, for about 25 years. And, did nothing. Well, it produced heat, proved itself. And for anyone who's saying SMRs are such an innovative new technology, that was small, that was modular. It was a reactor. So it hit all the 3 check marks. Yeah. And the best comment I've heard is that SMRs aren't new. Modular definitely isn't new. You can buy 1,000 megawatts at a time. It's large modular reactors now. So it really is just a buzzword, but it's not a new technology.
No, absolutely not. And especially here in the United States, where, our Navy, we have one of the largest nuclear navies. Most of our, all of our aircraft carriers and all of our submarines run on small modular reactors. They have since the 1950s. We even had some nuclear-powered cruisers that ran on small modular reactors. We don't have them anymore. They're all diesel-powered now, but our aircraft carriers and submarines are small modular reactors. This is a reality today, and they are supplied by the big players like Westinghouse and so on and so forth. But so I completely agree with you on that. But kind of going into getting into the weeds here, one thing I wanted to touch on is there was an article that was released several months ago, and YouTuber Gordon McDowell touched on this on his channel, that Saskatchewan, along with Alberta, New Brunswick, and Ontario, signed a memorandum of understanding on the development of small modular reactor development in Canada. Would you care to comment on that, or what developments have been made to, I guess, advance this space in terms of advanced nuclear? Because we know that Canada actually has a pretty robust nuclear program from a regulatory standpoint. You know, you've got the CANDU heavy water reactors. Ontario is very nuclear heavy with the Darlington plants and various other reactors that they have powering Toronto to this day. But I was hoping you could kind of touch on the current status of the Canadian government and their progress in towards advancing this technology forward.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of background on it too.
Sure.
So just to start with, so the federal government, the Liberal government right now, they've kind of put here's our plan to try and meet the carbon emission targets for Canada at 2040, 2050, whatever their number is. And they've put a big proponent into that, is to say nuclear is going to be part of that plan. And we're going to put some money forward to develop that. Now, of the consortium people that are in this memorandum of understanding, it started with Ontario and New Brunswick. And those are the places in Canada that have active nuclear power plants and nuclear industries, predominantly in Ontario. And then there's one facility in New Brunswick, which powers, I don't know, the whole province probably. But so Saskatchewan kind of signed on, and then Alberta signed on. And I think a lot of the reasoning was there was no other real good options, like as I mentioned before. So Saskatchewan, rightly realized that, nuclear is the way to go. And there's been a bit of tiptoeing into nuclear in the past in Saskatchewan. It's just never been fully committed towards it. And so then it always kind of fizzles out. And Alberta, they signed on recently, but Alberta, as everything I ever need to know about Alberta is they once looked at, can I detonate a nuclear device underground so that I could pump more oil? That says everything about what their priorities are. So I bet you they're looking at SMRs just to, can I help my oil production with it? New Brunswick, they're kind of in a different spot where they had a power plant. There was a report written about how poorly it was executed when it was done. And if you read the report, it says, yeah, they didn't have the design done when they started to build it. And that's why it was way more expensive. And if you do changes 80% done or 80% through the process of it, it's going to be way more expensive than catching in the beginning. So it was an expensive facility, but, been great since. And Ontario, just to turn into the politics of Canada, Ontario is a big province that you have to win if you want to actually have a federal government. So if I'm a federal government and I want to win an election, I'm going to dump money to Ontario because they will vote for me because I've dumped money. So it's kind of like bribing yourself back into the next election cycle. So a bit of it is that, to say we're going to dump some
We do a lot of that here.
Yeah.
Sadly.
It's like two provinces that get it in Canada. So, people always joke that by the time people in BC have first voted, well, it's already decided. So what does it matter? And I think the last one, they even called the election before they started to vote. So that's it. New Brunswick's got a little bit more innovative of the technologies. So they've got Moltex and another one that's escaping my name or my memory on it. They're based out of theirs, and those are both molten salt reactors. And then there's Terrestrial Energy, and I think NewScale have a set up shop in Ontario. And then in terms of the consortium, it is essentially kind of a bit of a research pool. So the provinces, from what I understand, would kind of chip in a little money and resources in some way to help with the development costs of bringing one of these reactors through the whole regulation scheme. And then out of it, they get to buy a reactor when it's available. Where I've been trying to push the province of Saskatchewan is to say, okay, you need to be a little bit more picky about how you pick a reactor, because if you're just picking by the first one I can get my hands on, or whatever Ontario says is the bestest, you're not actually taking the ownership of that decision of what would actually cause it to fail in the past, and which reactor actually has the best chance of succeeding, not which one's the first one I can get. Because everyone, remembers the Zune actually came out before the iPod.
Yeah.
How well did the Zune do, right? So
there was a reference in the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Aside from that, I don't think anyone below the age of 14 knows what a Zune is if you told them.
I could probably say I knew one person who had a Zune. It wasn't me, though. So.
If it was, it's okay. I kind of envied people who had one, to be honest with you, back in the day. But no, that's an interesting point. And I actually had a similar conversation with a friend of mine. We were talking about NewScale, and obviously they've made a lot of progress in this country. They got design certification through the NRC back in last year, actually. Chances are they will probably be the first to market with commercially viable small modular reactors for the utility sector before any other company, before Elysium, before Multex, before Fly, before any of these other companies can get it. Not because it's the best technology, but because they're a light water reactor and their technology corresponds with current NRC regulation. So I totally agree with you on that. Again, I have a whole show dedicated to talking about that. But in regards to Canada, I kind of wanted to focus because you've been actively lobbying your government to support these advancements in this technology. If you don't mind me asking, what conversations have you had? Where do you think the conversation's going? How's it going? I mean, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I'd clarify for anyone who's thinking of following in my footsteps, like lobbying on the terms of I'm trying to figure out who best to bribe in any way. Like I've spent zero money on this. And it's not so much an effort to say, I want this company to succeed. I've got my favorites, but that's not the whole point of it. A lot of it is, for one, if people like me aren't in that conversation, who are they listening to? And moneyed interests might not be the best interests. And as well, I come from a technology background, so I can explain things that, the typical politician wouldn't necessarily be able to know. And so I'm coming at it not from I'm lobbying for my team of whatever decision. I'm trying to walk them through the process to say, this is how I arrived here logically. And you can check my math. You can walk through this yourself to figure out why this is going to work this way. And that's why I said previously, where people just don't realize the magnitude of what the challenges would be. And once you can present that to them to say, if you want to try and get rid of people heating their homes with natural gas, here's how much energy I use right now in the province to do that activity. Replace that with electricity, here's that number. I want to replace this, and here's that number. And so you add that all up, and then you could take that number, and let's say it's 24 gigawatts, and then say, okay, well, how am I going to do that? I can either not do any of those things and live in a cave and eat mushrooms, or I can say I'll do it all with wind. Okay, what would that look like? And here's the cost associated to it. And oh, by the way, you need batteries, and here's the cost. So you just plainly put the numbers in front of people who normally wouldn't have actually done that math and not done that critical thinking to realize the whole thing is a system. And you can't just go by the buzzwords. You actually have to do your feasibility analysis study of it and figure out what your numbers are. That's when nuclear makes sense. And it makes sense because nuclear, as everyone watching this channel would know, it's like an order of magnitude more power potential than any other thing around.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. When I start, go ahead.
So your comment about who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So I started with, who's my representative? And, at the time I was pretty politically, juvenile. So I didn't barely know who I was, but I just sent an email, right? So I sent an email to the person who was my representative at the time for the provincial level. And I shockingly got a call back. And it was someone who was actually not in the position because it had been vacated from the previous election. But he was like, hey, let's go meet. And so I had the coffee meeting with him. And I think he was fully expecting me to come in and say, rah, rah, granola, why can't we have more wind? But here I came in with, a plan, an actual plan of here's what I think we should do. And here's why, and here's the numbers to back it up. And I kind of took him by surprise with that. And so he then introduced me to some other people in the party and some more ministers. And I've been shockingly surprised by the people who are interested in actually learning about this. And I'm coming intentionally from a very neutral place. I'm not coming in to say, you guys are stupid and you should do it this way and blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to just come in it to say, these are the facts. These are the numbers. Do what you want with it, but the numbers don't lie. And here's my proof. And kind of get them to that same point. And I'll say some of the meetings you come into and they expect you to, what's your pitch and like, where should I sign? What's your gimmick? And I found it good that I could come in without a specific agenda other than educating them on the topic. And then that itself has led to, hey, you should present this to more of us because we all need to learn this thing, and then more and more. And even once I started to kind of hit the end of the line of like, okay, they now all know they're still doing it wrong. Then I took the message to the other party too and burned both ends of the candle. So I'm trying not to be any politically affiliated to any of these parties that are making decisions. But for one, the people in charge should have the knowledge of what is the challenges and like the politician side of it, because they typically won't get into the weeds. And then on the other side of the opposition, everyone who's advocating for wind and solar needs to have that education in the back pocket to know, by the way, that's not going to work. And there is the Michael Moore movie that kind of did a bit of that, and then people said, he's just a hack, and let's dismiss everything he says. And to be honest, I think some of that was the takeaway from his movie is that we should all be sad and like just go kill ourselves, because if there's less people, then there's less of a problem there to solve, right? So there wasn't any kind of like, and now you should do this, or oh, by the way, and he glazed over nuclear in that movie as well. So.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that documentary, and I'm kind of glad I didn't watch the whole thing, because I was probably going to consider seeing a therapist after watching it. But it's very different than from other documentaries like Pandora's Promise or Juice, which basically focuses on the fact that, well, there are plenty of countries that don't have access to electricity, but they need it. And, there are sustainable ways to providing that. And nuclear has to be part of that if you want to have, energy dense lives. And I appreciate what you're doing up there in Canada. I'm just trying to remember what my next question was here. I guess what is the next step? Like what is the next step in I guess Canada's strategy? Like where are we going from here? Where are we going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If you have any like projections based on your conversations with the people that you've spoken with.
So where I think they're going to be is unfortunately not where they should be. So they've got a plan, and I think they're targeting like 2030 or sometime after that to kind of have the first reactors, and I think terrestrial energy is, to be honest, going to be the first one out there.
Really?
Before those actually come to fruition. Now, there was a recent article where New Brunswick was complaining because they're being told we can't use coal power beyond this date. And there's like a 3-year gap between them making power with coal and them having nuclear. And they're just saying we need a bit more runway to be able to get to that nuclear fate. Now, a lot of that timeline is based upon rules and regulations that are better in Canada than what they are in the States, because they're more accurate for the actual technology being proposed. But personally, I always find it frustrating when you say, okay, I'm going to submit this to this body, then they've got 2 years to just sit on it before they actually have to respond. And then I get 2 years, and then 2 years, and 2 years, and 2 years. So there's lots of time just eaten up. And I like to point to the pandemic to say, well, how long does it take to get a vaccine? Oh, 20 years. Or if we really need it, 1, right? And the same applies to nuclear, where they're going to have their pace and they're targeting 2030. But right now, we've got like massive wildfires out in the west, and there's hurricanes on the east, and predictions that there might be some droughts and stuff in the nearing future. So by 2030, if climate change seems to be kind of taking more of an effect, I hope there'd be more of a push for that. But I feel the knee-jerk reaction would then be, well, it's just more do renewables and stop investing any money in nuclear. That's the other thing I try to combat against, is that sentiment. So that's the numbers, is like 2030 is kind of when you'd start to see some of those nuclear technologies get to the forefront. Gun to your head, there's nothing stopping this happening in like 2-3 years. If you want to wait, a year between each email getting responded to, sure, it's going to take 10 years. But the physics of it and the math of it, I don't even understand why you couldn't technically build 95% of the whole facility and not have the core critical, or not even have the core nuclear at that point, and just test out the whole facility around it, have that lock, stock, and barrel done, and then finally get your license for it. And good thing to point to, SpaceX and Tesla. Sure, they're innovative, but I didn't realize this, the big launch tower that they're building down in Boca Chica,
Yes.
they technically not received the permission to build that.
No. And
it's almost done. And same thing, they're running ahead on their facility in Germany without all the approvals. And there's a risk to that, but also it's smart, because good luck trying to tear that down after it's been built to this point, and everyone's super duper excited about it. And it can be the same thing with nuclear. If you get people aware of what it is and excited about it, and say, look, this is the solution to climate change stuff. And if only that one little guy would check his email and respond back faster than 2 years, things would happen quicker.
Okay. So just to be clear, your position on what we should do is we should just start building nuclear reactors without government approval and just get it out there before they start realizing what the hell we're doing.
No, I'll be clear. The reactor is a small facet of the whole thing. And everyone talks about, I've got this reactor that's the size of a coffee cup. Whip-de-doo. Where's the power generating facility that's around it? And some of the nuclear technologies will talk about, okay, ours fits in a sea can, and it produces 100 million megawatts of power. Okay, that power generation is not coming out of that sea can, just the heat is. And that's a big facility that needs to work. And again, if you wait until you've got your reactor just like tidy with a bow on it before you even think about what your power generating facility looks like, you're going to be screwed. And power generating facilities are fairly generic. And, if I want to, same kind of thing, if I'm going to build one, okay, it's going to be beautiful and it's going to be expensive. But if you have the mindset to build hundreds of them, you're going to approach the whole thing differently. And I haven't seen any group, like even when you're talking about smaller modular reactors, unless the whole power plant is going to be modular and rapidly deployed, that's going to be then your limitation to how fast you can bring them online. And
Sure.
back to the whole, like, people don't understand the staggering scale of it. Even if all the reactors were greenlit and we're going ahead forward, I could do the math for Saskatchewan, and we're peanuts compared to what the US is and compared to what the rest of Canada is. And it is stupid amounts of power that you would need to produce. And even if you're using nuclear with like reckless abandonment on it, it's a challenge to meet that demand in any kind of a time frame.
Yeah, that's a good point. You've mentioned several different companies. You've mentioned Terrestrial. You've mentioned Multex, NewScale. You've obviously done far more research than I have with your background, and you are absolutely able to see things that I can't. But based on your interactions, is there a particular company or group of companies that you feel are taking the right approach in developing their technology appropriately? Like you said, it's not just the reactor, it's power conversion, it's the way they go about, modularity. Is there a particular company that you feel is on the right track or could be doing a better job? If so, what do you think that is?
I pretty much start and say no, because any nuclear company, they're going to be focused on the reactor, and that's where they start and finish the whole conversation. I'll say Flive has a little bit more insight or foresight, I should say, to actually consider the power generation facility as part of their feather in the hat, right? And so most of them, they're like, here's our pot of boiling hot nuclear energy, and whatever you want to do with it, put it through a steam turbine, so what? And Flive has rightfully said, hey, this supercritical CO2 stuff is where it's at. And hey, there's some other benefits because it kind of breaks the chain of tritium production within hydrogen and everything.
Sure.
And it removes hydrogen, which is the part that goes boom on any reactor. So smart to just try and remove that as well. But I haven't seen, I'm not blaming them. I haven't seen many focus on it because, to be honest, that's the power generating people that would build the rest of the balance of the plant. And unless you're going to come in and say, yeah, I'm a nuclear power company and I also have this out of the box power plant with me, it's hard enough to get the money to do the first part, let alone pre-build a power plant for a facility that doesn't exist yet. And again, most people haven't put into the thought to say, how do I build a facility that is modular and scale that up? So they're so focused on the modularity of the reactor without thinking that, okay, still need to build a balance of the plants all around them. On the whole, they're still kind of just narrowly focused, but I understand why they are. I haven't seen any big step to say, let's build power plants really quickly.
No, I hear you.
That is the push that I'm making too for the province to realize there's money to be made on this. And, if you're the person, say you're just going to buy whatever reactor you get from this memorandum of understanding. If you have the rest of the facility ready to go and build the industry within your province to build the facilities that go around this core, then it's kind of like, great, I'm Tony Stark and I've got my little power core. Oh, and by the way, here's the suit that I stick it in and now it's useful. Otherwise, it's pretty useless. And, it's got potential. And now I'm going to start thinking about what I'm going to do with that potential. That's stupid.
That is the best analogy I have ever heard for the comparison of a nuclear reactor and the other 85% of what makes a reactor useful, which is the power conversion system and the off-gassing and all that stuff. So thank you for making that analogy. We are going to incorporate that in future episodes. I don't know how, but that is by far the best analogy I've heard of this, since we started talking about this. So thank you for that. I do need to wrap up here pretty soon, but before we sign off here, were there any notes you wanted to make, or was there anything you wanted to say? Just final words or final thoughts?
I was just going to mention the comment I made about that supercritical CO2 Brayton cycle power generating stuff. Back when Fly was kind of pitching that, it was like, oh, we could do this, should be great. That's actually gotten some investment from Alberta for different reasons too.
Whoa, wait, really?
They're starting to do a lot more of the research into those supercritical CO2 power generating type equipment.
Really?
So those are coming out of the whole theoretically we can do this to be, those are going to get worked on it. And I don't understand why they couldn't get worked on earlier, because if it's the size of a tabletop, well, I can make 5. It shouldn't be that expensive, you think.
Right.
And if it breaks, well, build another one, and it costs you $1,000 worth of steel, right? So that is starting to come about. And to be honest, then it's one of those pieces to say, well, what's stopping this from actually working? I've got this and this and this and this that'll work. Well, the whole thing then together would work. And couple that with, again, as you mentioned, like China starting to do a little bit more liquid thorium reactor stuff. Well, then the liquid thorium part doesn't sound so stupid if the whole country of China is starting to develop it. The Brayton cycle stuff with the CO2 doesn't sound so stupid if that's already getting developed by Alberta. So put them together, well, that just makes sense. So it's good to see things develop. I would like to see them happen faster, but I'm at least positively pleased with just the change in the rhetoric from the people who would be the most against nuclear, and the technologies inadvertently getting developed into that path.
All right. Well, very well said. And I guess last thing before we sign off, if anyone wants to find out what you're doing or to get involved, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
No. Okay. Sorry. Let me do that again, because I don't want to screw up the edit here. Well, that's well said. And again, thank you for your thoughts on the matter. Before we sign off here, I just wanted to ask if anyone wanted to get involved, particularly in Canada or just in this space altogether. What would be a good place to go and do that, Danny?
I mean, the first step is recognizing that you actually have to do something, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to wait around, and I'm sure someone else will talk to my local representatives for me. I mean, if you want to get politically engaged, it's simple. I accidentally got invited to like an NDP executive meeting for a local area and attended it. And, we had a recent election. And so the guy who wanted us to vote for us was walking down and then strike up the conversation. So if you're passionate about it and you want to see it, don't approach it in a aggressive kind of fashion, because that'll just put people off. Come at it from a as neutral as you can, just to inform them to say, hey, by the way, this is something that needs to be considered a bit better or more or whatever. And then, don't be shy about doing it and reminding them, and, don't be horrible. But I'll send an email, and then I'll wait a month. And then if I haven't heard anything, I'll give them a poke and say, hey, any action on this, any updates? And then it's usually, oh, yeah, oops, sorry, I forgot about it. So in some ways you have to be the polite squeaky wheel. But for most people, they feel as if it should be a certain way, but they've done absolutely nothing to try and push it in that way. And just even striking up the conversation is the first step.
All right. Well said, Danny. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Sean Kenny. This was Rock Logic.